Hey there, internet friends. Trevor Starkey back with another episode of That D Plus Show. Classes in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. If you like the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, like videos or podcasts, things, whatever. Do all the things you can do. Joining me today, it is a solo show. I am preparing for another upcoming Disney trip. I'm going to one of the Star Wars After Dark events this coming week. And so, as is become very much the tradition of that D Plus show surrounding my Disney trips, I'm doing an episode of Behind the Attraction. And now it would have been great if there were like a Star Wars specific episode of Behind the Attraction, but that was basically like last year, it was a few years ago now. Actually, it was like episode 1 of the Behind the Attraction stuff that I would have done back when there was like a Star Tours episode. But we're still gonna kind of push forward with another one of my absolute favorite rides at Disney. Today's episode is I'm labeling it Part 6. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. This is the second episode of season 2 of Behind the Attraction on Disney Plus. If you want more Behind the Attraction solo episodes from me, boy, are you in luck. There's part 1 we did back episode 88 of the podcast, which featured Jungle Cruise, The Haunted Mansion, and Star Tours. Part 2 was episode 107, Tower of Terror, Space Mountain, and The Castles. Part 3 was episode 116, Disneyland Hotel and It's a Small World. And then part 4 was episode 132, Trains, Trams, and Monorails, and the Hall of Presidents. And then most recently, episode 209, a few weeks back, actually, I talked about Pirates of the Caribbean, which was the first of like our season 2 Behind the Attraction episodes, where I've kind of been just saying, hey, I'm just going to do kind of one episode and kind of, focus on that singular episode. Our history lesson, these originally released, the first 5 episodes of season 1 originally released July 21st, 2021. Then episodes 6 through 10 of season 1 were August 25th of that year. And then November 1st, 2023 is when season 2 episodes 1 through 6 were all released. Unknown if they're going to do a future installment with a season 3 or not. But I've still got 4 episodes to go where I can do Disney trips and have these episodes to go if need be. Our runtime for this particular episode is a 38-minute runtime for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. In the Disney Plus docu-series timeline of things, we had Renovations that had come out April 12th, 2023, followed by Matilda's The Word at Our Feet. Word at Our Feet or World at Our Feet? I may have mistypoed. I wrote The Word at Our Feet. April 26th. Ed Sheeran, The Sum of It All was May 3rd. Animals Up Close with Bertie Gregory was September 13th. Then we had season 2 here of Behind the Attraction November 1st, followed by A Real Bug's Life on January 24th, 2024, and Choir on January 31st. And this is a note I'm carrying over from the past episode where I touched on this, but this is one of only 3 series listed in the docu-series original programming on like the Disney Plus original programming Wikipedia that has a second season, with the others being The World According to Jeff Goldblum and Magic of Disney's Animal Kingdom. Though there are a couple others that have been renewed for a second season, like Limitless with Chris Hemsworth and A Real Bug's Life. And actually, The Real Bug's Life second season may have come out. I feel like I'm seeing that regularly on my Disney Plus recommendations, but that could just be because I watched this. And so it's just pitching me the season 1 that was back in January. Anyway, our director here, as always, for these Behind the Attraction episodes is Brian Volk-Weiss, who's done a lot of documentaries and various comedy specials going back to 2017, including work with Kevin Smith, Joel McHale, Lavelle Crawford, Larry the Cable Guy. But he is also the director of The Toys That Made Us and The Movies That Made Us series for YouTube/Netflix, I believe. And then also of note, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is one of the producers of the series. I think largely stemming from the first episode being The Jungle Cruise, to tie into the Jungle Cruise movie that was releasing around that time. And once again, our cast of characters stars Paget Brewster as the narrator, who you may recognize from things like Criminal Minds, later seasons of Community, and the DuckTales reboot. And then also, of course, lots of Imagineers. Tony Baxter being the big central Imagineer of Big Thunder Mountain, as this was largely his baby, and he's been able to kind of work on it all throughout the various iterations of the ride. So yeah, diving into kind of the thoughts / trivia on this episode, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, the wildest ride in the wilderness, as anybody who's ridden it will know, all stems back to Walt's love of trains that gets a lot of, love and attention, as well as kind of early Frontierland stuff, which included the Rainbow Caverns mine train, which then would evolve into the mine train through Nature's Wonderland, which was a nice, lethargic, slow train ride through old Frontierland, which had, smattering of animatronic or light animatronic creatures and critters around. But it also would compete with like the pack mules of early Disneyland and stuff like that. We get some references and an appearance from Mark Davis early on, one of those kind of key early Imagineers that came in and in particular inflicted a lot of humor into rides, notably the Jungle Cruise. Speaking of that, as an example, he's very much kind of the responsible one for turning that from being a let's ride through, nature and rivers and see kind of jungle creatures, and turn it into what it is today of just an endless series of bad jokes and puns and silly stuff like that. Mark Davis added that same kind of humor to the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland with like, bears scratching their backs against a tree and stuff like that. Adding a little bit of humor to the all ages audiences that would be riding at those rides. Cut to Disney World, where this was raised a lot in the last episode we talked about with Pirates of the Caribbean, but Disney World's getting created around this time, and the decision was made, hey, it's Florida, they don't need pirate stuff. They've lived and grown up with pirate stuff their whole lives. So we're going to, instead of doing pirates, we're going to do like a big Western themed, part of the park. And we're going to have, really double down on that. California doesn't need that because they, are the Wild West kind of stuff. But obviously before we get to the obvious, that didn't happen kind of stuff. This big Western themed expansion was labeled Thunder Mesa, and size wise, it would have been easily the biggest thing that really Disney had done to that point in terms of like a single kind of themed area or attraction, with a lot of Imagineers kind of putting it on par these days with the big rock formation of Cars Land, and also Galaxy's Edge. Just kind of that kind of scale back in the 70s, effectively, for a few rides in a very Western themed land. It was unfortunately too big to get done in time for the 1971 opening of Disney World, so they decided it was going to be a phase 2 project, and they would kind of start working on it and planning that way. But then the demand for pirates at Disney World was so high that these plans that basically ended up getting scrapped in favor of fast tracking a pirates ride there at Disney World. And this is where we kind of get our introduction to Tony Baxter in the lineage and the timeline of things, whereas he's basically a fresh-faced Disney Imagineer, started working, I think, selling ice cream, I think is the story they tell, but decided real quick that he wanted to be more in the Imagineering kind of department. So he went to Imagineering, took some sort of contraption. Bob Gurr, famous Imagineer behind the stuff like the Matterhorn and Autopia and stuff. He kind of talks about this little, his first time remembering meeting Tony Baxter, basically saying, hire this guy or he's never going to leave us alone. And so, yeah, they brought Tony Baxter on. Tony Baxter kind of ends up working in the model shop and apprenticing a little bit with Mark Davis, as Mark Davis really kind of tries to spearhead the Thunder Mesa project. But it starts to get kind of scaled back before ultimately, hey, no, it's not going to happen. But Tony Baxter takes this idea of a minecart ride from their big Thunder Mesa models and stuff and kind of starts figuring out and selling how they could maybe do that at a quarter of the cost of Thunder Mesa. They showcased that there were like 9 different models made at the time, but then while they're working on that, of course, the space race reaches, an apex with us landing on the moon and or having recently landed on the moon and stuff. So Space Mountain kind of gets the priority push for a 1975 launch in Florida, and then also in Disneyland, pushing again Big Thunder Mountain back to kind of not the back of the line, but just not prioritized. However, young guests were seeking more thrill rides. So in addition to Space Mountain, they decide, let's go ahead and do this Big Thunder Mountain project in Disneyland, as well as Disney World. And they touch on the idea that basically because of the spacing in the park, they just kind of did a reverse of the blueprints for Disneyland from what they had originally planned on in Disney World. So it's basically a mere flip of the ride between the two parks. And they talk about the fact that they installed it effectively in both parks while both parks were fully operational, and, took a big chunk out of Disneyland's Frontierland in particular, in the middle of the park, whereas the Frontierland and the Big Thunder Mountain placement of in Frontierland in Disney World, which I now have context for having been there last year, is a little bit more like its own kind of thing. So like it could be worked on without completely like destroying walkways and paths and stuff like that. But Disneyland was a much bigger kind of beast and imposition to have that done. But they got it going. And they decided to do it in both Disneyland and Disney World, so they didn't have this weird pirates thing again, where, Big Thunder Mountain's the big new ride, the big roller coaster to go see in Disneyland, but why isn't it in Disney World? No, they just made sure they were doing it in both places. It opened in Disneyland and had that one inspired by Bryce Canyon, while the Disney World one was inspired more by Monument Valley. The story of which was going to be this old West mining company, and the spirits of the Big Thunder Mountain were going to kind of come out when the old mining company kind of dug too deep. We have kind of the stories and references here to Billy the Goat in the Disneyland version of the ride, who those that have ridden the ride will know him as the goat chewing some dynamite. And they touch on the fact that they're this, especially in the social media age, the idea of the goat trick has very much become a thing of this goat is placed right at a pretty sharp turn. So if you turn your head to the right and kind of keep yourself focused on the goat, it's going to feel like the centrifugal force is just taking you that much faster around that corner. So a lot of people like to kind of, add the thrill of that because of that goat's placement. And it has kind of become a character in and of itself in the ride. And obviously it is an homage to the Mark Davis kind of critter humor of his era. So September 2nd, 1979, we finally have the Disneyland opening of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, followed a year-ish later by the opening of Disney World. Then we would get Tokyo Disneyland next, which largely shared the Disney World elements, which makes sense because they are actually... The Tokyo Disneyland, I remember back from like the Imagineering story and stuff, was like they just kind of copied and pasted Disneyland into Tokyo Disneyland. But they have kind of some things that just make more sense to do the Disney World version of the rides. And then we would get the kind of spiritual successor, Big Grizzly Mountain, added to Hong Kong Disney in 2012. Which they described as a spiritual cousin. The Big Grizzly story is fueled by a lot of Chinese numerology, with 8 being a very lucky number and 4 being a very unlucky number. And the story of that one being clever, of like August 8th, 1888 is when the gold mine was struck, and the town became super rich and whatnot. And then on the ride, instead of going down the lucky number 8 shaft, you swerve and you go down shaft number 4, the very unlucky path that's going to lead to all the weird rockiness and all that stuff. For me, now that I have the context of it, and based on what they show, it looks a little bit more like Expedition Everest, in terms of like its kind of ride mechanics, because it features a chunk of the ride where kind of you go up to the top and then something snaps and suddenly the train starts going backwards for a portion of it, which the first time I experienced that at Disney Park was Expedition Everest last year at Disney World. So seems like it's maybe sharing a little bit more of that ride than strictly, like it's leaning on the story of Big Thunder Mountain, but it's leaning on the ride mechanics of Expedition Everest. Then we get a nice little showcase for the Disneyland Paris version that opened in 1992, aka the Euro Disney version. And in large part, I think, because Tony Baxter was effectively the creative lead for Euro Disney and Disneyland Paris, and obviously had that love and lineage with Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is very much like a showcase piece at Disneyland Paris, where not only is it like the big attraction in Frontierland, it is its own island in Frontierland, whereas Frontierland, especially at Disneyland, has the Mark Twain or not like Tom Sawyer Island in the middle of the rivers of America. That's not really a thing they needed to do at Disneyland in Paris. So they turn really that island in the rivers of America kind of vibe into the Thunder Mountain ride. And basically you start landside, you get in the train there, you go under the water and then go up through Big Thunder Mountain and then end up going back under the water to get to kind of the ride climax. And so real cool, just kind of like incorporating the movement and the travel of that ride into Disneyland Paris. It's definitely, if I ever get to go to Disneyland Paris, it's one of the like, oh, I definitely need to experience what that feels like kind of vibes, given how much I enjoy. And for audio listeners, I'll just call it now the image I've had kind of up on the YouTube version is a picture of me, Cameron, Logan, and Frank from when the 4 of us all did a Disney trip back at the beginning of 2022, I think. And it's all of us kind of taking a selfie in Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, because it's just a fun ride, real good fun times. We also touch on the idea that all of Frontierland in Paris is connected via story. There wasn't this, this was one of the first cases where they were able to build the ride in from the jump, because obviously it came after the fact for Disneyland, came after the fact for Disney World, came after the fact for Tokyo Disneyland. But this is the first time they could kind of theme the whole park together with Big Thunder Mountain Railroad as like a central figurehead. And so they touch on the idea that the gold baron Henry Ravenwood owned the mine in the Disneyland Paris version, and also is the owner of the dilapidated house kind of at the top of the hill, which is effectively their version of Haunted Mansion, aka it's the Phantom Manor there. And instead of the classic graveyard scene that you get in Haunted Mansion, Phantom Manor's kind of closing scene of the ride is more, Old West saloon kind of scenario and stuff like that, with ghosts and ghouls and whatnot. But yeah, it kind of ties the whole themes together in that land. When we move up to Disneyland 2013, 2014, Disneyland need to be touched up. So the Frontier or the ride that we're talking about, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, closes down for the better part of a year, while the entire track gets rebuilt. But we're in the age where this can all be done with computers now and doesn't need to be, handcrafted, as it did back in the 70s. So they're able to kind of map everything out with computers, have it really do the rebuilding of everything. And they also touched up the story there, when they redid that in the Disneyland version, where now Disneyland's version features the idea that Barnabas T. Bullion is the owner of the mining company and built Rainbow Ridge Town nearby to kind of dig into Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. And if you see the portrait of Baxter T. Bullion that is hidden in one of the little town or little buildings in the town at the end of the ride, you will see that Barnabas T. Bullion bears a striking resemblance to Tony Baxter. Obviously, he is designed as the alter ego for it. They've also played around with the wider mythology across the Disney parks, where Bullion is also a member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, aka C, which got created back when they did Disney Sea in, I think, also Tokyo. Is that where it is? Maybe. Anyway, other members of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers include Captain Mary Oceaneer of the Oceaneer Labs aboard Disney Cruises, as well as Miss Adventure Falls at Disney's Disney's Tycoon Lagoon, rather. Dr. Albert Falls, of course, the iconic Schweitzer Falls reference at Jungle Cruise. He is a member. And then you have Harrison Hightower III, who is, hey, there we go, Tokyo Disney Sea's Tower of Terror, kind of owner / head. And that caricature is the alter ego of another Imagineer, Joe Rohde. Then we have kind of spearheading the revitalization there in 2013 is Imagineer Ray Spencer, who's the creative director of the time. He oversaw the refurbishment, and he tells a story about riding the ride 15 times a night just to enjoy just to adjust the timing of the ride and make sure everything's feeling good and is appropriately mapped out. And also because they were doing this in a digital age, they were able to map out the digital or the canyons or the caves of the ride and do kind of full scans and map visual effects, including, a lit stick of dynamite, the spark kind of going up through the canyon and following the train as it goes through. So you get the sizzling, the crackling, everything. And then once you get to the top and are ready to start doing kind of the last drop stretch of the ride, it's because you're being propelled by the explosions that are happening all over the place. Also, I'd forgotten this. I've watched this episode once before, but I'd completely forgotten this part. But the ride did inspire a series of comics about the origins of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, in which, again, Tony Baxter's kind of alter ego characters featured heavily and references and stuff like that. Baxter also shows a fan-made Billy the Goat gift that was given to him. And they touch on the fact that this serves as a great handoff story between kind of the first generation of Imagineers via the Mark Davis era and his original plans for Thunder Mesa, and the second generation with characters like Tony Baxter. And they also celebrate the history of the park as a whole, with the Rainbow Ridge town very much being populated with buildings that were in the original kind of like Rainbow Caverns ride back in the day. Kind of the little launching point for that initial Rainbow Caverns mine train and stuff, and the mine train through Nature's Wonderland was a whole series of like small little town mock-up kind of things. They're not the originals, as they had severe termite damage and needed to be rebuilt, but they were rebuilt based off of like original drawings and plans and stuff like that. So cool little, again, nod to the history. And of course, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad continues to be one of the most popular rides in all of the parks, with a very steady throughput of clicks at the turnstiles as they touch on a lot throughout the episode. So that's this episode on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, kind of the highlights and things I wanted to call out on it and the notes I took. I give this, as I often give these, an A. I'm a big sucker for these, Imagineers talking about the history of Disney and like the work that went in behind the scenes on the rides and stuff like that. And the evolution of the rides over time is always a fun delight. Extra credit, other suggestions if you like this. Of course, we still have a handful of other season 2 episodes to go. The next one being the Indiana Jones ride. Then there's also kind of a showcase on the food, and shout out to, it's not going to be referenced in that episode, but I saw the news recently that one of the Disney World Resort hotel restaurants, I believe, earned a Michelin star, which is the first of any of the Disney parks. So shout out to whichever one of those places has incredibly high quality food, apparently. But then we'll also have episodes on Epcot coming up and the nighttime spectaculars, aka like the fireworks and now freaking drone shows and stuff like that. So other suggestions would be the Imagineering story, of course, Disney Insider, Magic of Disney's Animal Kingdom, One Day at Disney, the One Day at Disney shorts, Disney's Fairy Tale Weddings special, Disney Parks Sunrise series, Decorating Disney Holiday Magic, and then the last one I always throw in here is the Defunctland YouTube series, because they do a ton of great stuff over there. Shout out to Kevin Perjurer and the just incredible work that he has done over his YouTube documentarian career. Extracurriculars, other things I'm watching on Disney Plus. I watched the Bad Batch finale, and I thought that tied up the story of Clone Force 99 very well. I don't know if we'll ever do an episode on it because Cam hasn't really kept up with that series at all or anything like that, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only one here that did. But I ultimately really enjoyed kind of where that kind of crew, the story they go on, and the little found family they have. I thought they did a really good job with that one. So shout out to Bad Batch, and then we also had the first part of the 3-part X-Men 97 finale this week, which I also caught up on, and just like, oh, they're doing some stuff. So we'll see where that goes in the coming weeks. I believe the plan next week will be for us to do the Tales of the Empire series, much like we did Tales of the Jedi last year, since that's their big May the 4th drop this year. So we'll probably be talking about that next week. So stay tuned for that and everything else we do here on That D Plus Show. That's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you to you for listening to me, if you did, for this little solo episode on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. I'm looking forward to riding it probably 2 or 3 times while I'm over there. I'm only going for like a day and a half this trip because it is really, I'm driving out for the Disneyland After Dark event, basically. So I'm driving out Monday, driving back Wednesday. The event itself is Tuesday, so I'm going to probably be at the park a little bit on Monday after I get there, and then pretty much all day Tuesday, and then drive home Wednesday to beat rush hour traffic and all that fun stuff. And then we'll record next week's episode on Thursday. So yeah, stay tuned for all of that. You follow all of us. You follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. In addition to this, I'll shout out that Nerdy Site Show. Logan joined us this last week, and you can hear us talk about some of the movies that Logan's been watching, as well as some game thoughts from Cameron and I. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please remember to like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other. Class dismissed. And keep your arms and legs in the car, for this is the wildest ride in the wilderness.